Dig. Babysitting, easy money, right? $100 to watch my cousin and his friends for the night. We're talking video games, snacks, the whole deal. It seemed like a breeze. The kind of night where you just kick back, relax, and let the kids wear themselves out. But that night turned into something I'll never forget. We were camped out in the basement, game controllers in hand, the room filled with laughter that echoed off the walls. The TV cast flickering light, throwing long, eerie shadows that none of the kids noticed. They were too absorbed in their game, eyes glued to the screen, oblivious to the creeping darkness around us. Outside, a snowstorm raged, howling winds rattling the windows, and sending a chill through the house that settled deep in my bones. Then, a sound pierced through the laughter. Footsteps. Not just any footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and coming from above. My heart skipped a beat. The house was supposed to be empty. My aunt and uncle were out for the night, and there were no pets. But the sound was unmistakable. "Stay here," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady as I put down the controller. The kids, too engrossed in their game, barely noticed the urgency in my tone. I slowly made my way to the stairs, each step heavy with growing dread. The basement door at the top of the stairs was wide open, a door that should have been closed. It had no interior lock, a trivial detail that suddenly seemed terrifying. Shadows in the dark. As I reached the top of the stairs, the cold air seeping in from the open door sent a shiver down my spine. I strained my ears, trying to pick up any sound, any hint of movement in the darkness beyond. But all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, loud and insistent in the oppressive silence. Then, I saw it, a shadow, fleeting, just beyond the doorway. It was so quick, it could have been a trick of the light, but I knew better. Someone, or something, was out there. Panic surged through me, and I raced back down the stairs, adrenaline flooding my system. "Workout room," I barked, ushering the kids into the darkened space. I shut off the lights, plunging us into blackness, the air thick with fear. We huddled together, every nerve on edge as we listened. The basement door creaked open, the sound slicing through the silence like a blade. My breath caught in my throat as slow, deliberate footsteps descended. Thud. Thud. Each step echoed in my chest, growing louder, closer. One of the kids started to sob, the sound contagious, spreading panic like wildfire. I forced myself to stay calm, even as terror gripped me. "Shut up," I hissed, my voice barely steady. With trembling hands, I grabbed a chair and some weights, wedging them against the workout room door. It was a flimsy barricade, but it was all we had. The silence was shattered again by the sickening sound of another door creaking open somewhere else in the basement, the boiler room. The kids screamed, their cries almost drowning out the sound of our doorknob rattling violently. The intruder was right there, just inches away, separated only by our makeshift barrier. I pushed against the door with all my strength, feeling the pressure of the unknown force pressing back. The escape. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the pounding stopped. The footsteps retreated, each one faster than the last, ascending back up the stairs. We waited in the stifling darkness, holding our breath until we were sure the intruder had left. When the house finally fell silent, I crept out of the workout room, my heart still hammering in my chest. The place was a wreck, doors left wide open, windows flung ajar, but the intruder was gone, vanished like a ghost into the night. Relief washed over me when I realized that we were all safe. Some items were missing, stolen in the chaos, but that was nothing compared to the terror we had endured. As I sat down, trying to process the nightmare that had unfolded, a gnawing fear lingered. Something still felt wrong, as if an unseen presence was watching, waiting for the right moment to return. The night in the woods. A few weeks later, I took another babysitting job. This time, it was for Matthew, a quiet kid who hardly spoke. His parents were heading out for the evening, leaving me in charge. I convinced myself it would be different this time, safer. I couldn't have been more wrong. The night began harmlessly enough. We took Matthew and his dog for a walk in the woods behind their house. The trees loomed tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. It was peaceful, almost serene. But then, out of nowhere, the dog went berserk, barking ferociously at something hidden behind a large tree. I squinted, trying to see what had spooked the dog. And then I saw him, a man, just standing there, his eyes locked on us. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the man remained motionless, his gaze fixed on us. We hurried back to the house, but a sense of unease clung to me like a shadow. The dog, usually calm, wouldn't stop pacing, its eyes glued to the tree line outside. I triple-checked every door and window, making sure they were securely locked. We settled in to play some video games, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Then I heard it, a loud thud outside the window. I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced out and saw that a toy bucket had been knocked over. The dog went wild, barking and growling at something I couldn't see. Fear gnawed at me as I told Matthew to grab his dad's hunting rifle. It was a reckless decision, considering he was only 8, but panic clouded my judgment. Strange noises began to echo around the house, tapping on windows, the clinking of chimes, things falling over. My nerves were shot, every sound sending a jolt of terror through me. Finally, I caught a glimpse of someone through the window. He walked by, then stopped, noticing me. I lifted the gun, trying to show that I was armed, but instead of running, he crouched down, staring at me with eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. He eventually retreated back into the woods, vanishing as if he had never been there. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. A week later, Matthew's parents called, telling me that a man had been stalking their house from the woods. They asked me to describe what I had seen, but I couldn't give them much. Just the haunting image of a man who seemed more shadow than flesh. They asked me to babysit again, but I always declined. Whatever was lurking out there in the woods, I wanted no part of it. The scorching heat of July. Last July, the relentless summer heat felt like more than just a seasonal discomfort. It mirrored the chaos that had overtaken my life. My once peaceful home had turned into a nightmare, plagued by ongoing electrical issues that left me powerless and frustrated. Each day became a blur of misery as I struggled to work from home, only to be thwarted by constant outages. Desperation drove me online, searching for a temporary escape, and that's when I stumbled upon a nearby Airbnb. Though it was a 45-minute drive from my home, it was the only option within my budget. Despite its affordability, the location was far from ideal. Shadow Creek, its name alone sent a chill down my spine, was a secluded, nearly forgotten area with a notorious reputation. But I reassured myself that my stay would be short and uneventful, and the money I'd save made the risk seem worthwhile. The ominous arrival. Exhausted from the stress and heat, I finally arrived at the Airbnb. The house looked like it had been neglected for years, with peeling paint and weeds overtaking the front yard. It stood there, small and isolated, as if forgotten by time. But I was too tired to care. I dropped my bag on the floor and collapsed into bed, surrendering to sleep without even bothering to unpack. Morning came too soon, and I forced myself to set up my workspace. As I plugged in my laptop, a sudden, sharp knock echoed through the quiet house, jolting me with a sense of unease. My first thought was that it must be the host checking in, but something held me back. This wasn't my home. What right did I have to answer? Curiosity won out, and I cautiously peered through the peephole. On the porch stood a man in his early 30s, his arms and neck covered in tattoos that seemed to writhe on his skin like dark, twisted vines. He didn't fit the image of a typical Airbnb host, far from it. His presence was deeply unsettling, and every instinct screamed at me to stay away. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I returned to my desk, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling, but the image of the man lingered, casting a dark shadow over my thoughts. The unnerving encounter. The day dragged on, filled with work that kept me glued to my laptop. As the hours passed, the memory of the tattooed man began to fade, buried under a mountain of tasks. But as evening fell and I finally allowed myself a break, the unease returned. Around 8 p.m., I decided to grab dinner from a nearby diner, a relic of a bygone era with flickering neon lights and a worn-down jukebox playing old tunes. The drive back was uneventful, the streets eerily deserted as if the town itself was holding its breath. As I sat down to eat, another knock shattered the silence, louder and more insistent than before. My heart sank. I knew who it would be even before I checked the peephole. There he was again, standing in the same spot, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Dread tightened its grip on me. What did he want? Why had he returned? This time, I didn't wait to find out. I walked away from the door, ignoring the persistent knocking that followed me like a sinister echo. The chilling discovery. I threw myself back into work, hoping to drown out my fear. Hours passed, the room growing darker, until only the faint glow of my laptop remained, casting eerie shadows on the walls. When I finally closed my laptop, a chill crept down my spine. The room was too quiet, too still. I glanced around, and that's when I saw them. Faint, muddy footprints on the floor, leading from the front door to the desk where I had been working. Panic surged through me. Those prints hadn't been there before. My heart raced as I followed the trail to the back door, which was slightly ajar, a sliver of cool night air drifting in. My breath caught in my throat, and I stood frozen, every nerve screaming at me to run. But I couldn't move. Then I heard it, the slow, deliberate creak of footsteps on the stairs. Someone was inside, carefully making their way down. My eyes snapped to the staircase, and that's when I saw him, the tattooed man, emerging from the shadows at the top of the stairs, something metallic glinting in his hand. Our eyes locked, and time seemed to stand still. The surprise on his face quickly twisted into something darker, rage. Before I could think, I spun around and bolted out the back door, not daring to look back. The desperate escape. I tore through the overgrown backyard, pushing through the tangled mess of weeds and bushes, heading for the line of trees that bordered the property. My lungs burned as I ran, my heartbeat deafening in my ears. I dove behind a large tree, gasping for breath, my body trembling with fear. Then I heard it again, footsteps, fast and determined, getting closer. I pressed myself against the rough bark, holding my breath as the footsteps passed by, disappearing into the dark woods. Shaking, I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, whispering my location to the operator. It felt like an eternity before I saw the flashing lights of police cars. I cautiously made my way back to the house, where officers were already combing the area. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with lingering fear. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The haunting aftermath. The next day, the police informed me that they had caught the man. His identity was confirmed by the distinctive tattoos I had described. He had been on a spree, breaking into homes and committing unspeakable acts against those unfortunate enough to cross his path. I shuddered to think what might have happened if I hadn't escaped. The experience left me deeply shaken, the memory of that night forever etched into my mind. The sound of his footsteps, the look of rage in his eyes, it all haunts me to this day. Shadow Creek seemed like just another forgotten town, but now I know that even in the most unassuming places, true horror can lurk just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. This story has haunted me for years, and I've finally reached my breaking point. I can no longer endure living in this house. It's time to sell it. I'll place an ad in the paper tomorrow. A haunting legacy. In 1999, my partner and I had been living in our spacious home just outside New York City for almost a decade. Despite our long tenure there, we never found peace. We were constantly troubled by a series of unsettling events. Unexplained phenomena. Objects would mysteriously move, and we often heard faint, sorrowful cries echoing through the house, a woman weeping in Spanish. The sound was never loud, but it was persistently unsettling. We questioned its origin. At first, we thought it might be coming from outside, but it always seemed to originate from within the house. Here's how I uncovered the tragic story behind this sorrowful spirit. The buyer. One afternoon, I received a phone call from a potential buyer. "Hello, is this Ronald?" "Yes, it is. How can I help you?" "I saw your ad in the paper today. I'm interested in your property. Can I come by to see it?" Response: "Sure. I'm available all day. Feel free to come over whenever you'd like." My partner was worried and asked if I planned to reveal the house's eerie history. "Are you going to tell him why we're selling the house?" "What do you mean?" "If we mention the ghost or the crying, no one will want to buy it. Besides, the spirit has never harmed us in 10 years. It won't harm anyone else. Let's not complicate things." The inspection. At 3 p.m., the buyer arrived, and I showed him around the house. He seemed particularly interested in a small compartment at the rear of the property. "Oh, that's the crawl space underneath. We haven't used it since we moved in. I'd like to take a look if that's all right." I didn't expect him to want to see the crawl space, but I agreed. I got the key and led him there. "Just a heads up, John, it's been a while since this crawl space was opened, so there might be some rodents or spiders." "No worries, I'm not afraid of them." The crawl space. We had to crouch in the crawl space due to the low ceiling, only about 4 feet high. It was cluttered with cobwebs and old droppings. The buyer was determined to explore every inch. He then noticed a large barrel at the far end. "What's this barrel doing here?" "I don't know. It's been here since we moved in. It might have belonged to the previous owner. I'd like to open it if that's all right with you." I was taken aback by his insistence, but tried to open it. It was sealed tightly, and despite my efforts, it wouldn't budge. The buyer seemed frustrated. "Buyer, I always check everything thoroughly before making a decision. I'm very interested in your property, but I need this barrel opened. I'll come back tomorrow with my wife." The discovery. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what might be inside that barrel. The next morning, I hired 2 workers to help me open it. By 11 a.m., they arrived. We struggled to move the heavy barrel outside to the garden. When we finally pried it open, a terrible stench filled the air, a foul, rotting smell unlike anything I had ever encountered. As I peered inside, my heart sank. The barrel contained a decaying body. The revelations. Who was this person? Why was their body sealed in a barrel and hidden beneath my house? The questions were chilling, and the answers were far from comforting. As I stood there in stunned silence, I realized one thing for certain. The house's dark secrets were only just beginning to reveal themselves. In the past, Ronald and his wife experienced a series of disturbing and eerie events within their home, which grew increasingly unsettling over time. Faced with escalating disturbances and a sense of unease, they made the difficult decision to sell their house. Little did they know that this decision would lead them to uncover a dark and sinister secret hidden deep within the very walls they once inhabited. The discovery. As Ronald and his wife prepared to show their house to a prospective buyer, the stranger made an unusual request to inspect the crawl space beneath the home. Although Ronald had lived in the house for over a decade without ever exploring this area, curiosity and a nagging sense of unease compelled him to agree. When Ronald opened the hatch to the crawl space, he was confronted with a large, enigmatic barrel shrouded in darkness. The barrel was tightly sealed, its presence unsettling and mysterious. Determined to understand what lay within, Ronald decided to call in experts the next day to investigate further. The grim find. The following morning, a team of forensic experts arrived to examine the barrel. With a sense of foreboding, they pried it open, revealing a chilling and macabre sight: the lifeless body of a woman, preserved in a green liquid. The discovery was both shocking and horrifying. The forensic team conducted an autopsy and identified the woman as petite, approximately 5 feet tall, with a distinctive gold tooth. Tragically, she was 8 months pregnant at the time of her death. To assist in identifying the father, DNA samples were taken from the unborn child. Unraveling the mystery. The discovery of the barrel set in motion a thorough investigation led by officers Mike and William. They began by examining Ronald's background and delving into the history of the house. Ronald revealed that he had purchased the property from Howard Elkins, who had since moved to Florida. Intrigued by this new lead, Mike and William embarked on a mission to locate Howard Elkins, hoping he might shed light on the mystery surrounding the barrel and its gruesome contents. The trail leads to Florida. Mike and William traveled to Florida with the intent of questioning Howard Elkins. However, their investigation took a tragic turn when they discovered that Howard was missing. His wife reported him as absent, and an extensive search ensued. Howard was eventually found dead in his car, an apparent suicide. Despite being questioned about the barrel, Howard had consistently denied any knowledge of it. His evasive and suspicious behavior, however, suggested that he was concealing something significant about the case. The web of deceit. With Howard's death, DNA evidence linking him to the deceased woman's child provided crucial insights. It confirmed Howard as the father of the unborn child. Further investigation revealed Howard's connection to Rena Angelica, the woman found in the barrel. Rena, who had emigrated from El Salvador, had shared her troubled experiences and her tumultuous relationship with Howard with friends. Testimonies from these friends shed light on Rena's struggles, her relationship with Howard, and her plans for the baby. The tragic conclusion. As the investigation progressed, it was revealed that Howard's wife was aware of the affair and the impending child. The evidence pointed to a devastating truth. Howard had murdered Rena in a fit of rage upon discovering that she intended to keep the baby and expose him as the father. The case concluded with Rena's body being returned to El Salvador, where her heartbroken mother could finally lay her to rest. The tragic end of Rena's story highlighted the deep and dark consequences of deceit, betrayal, and violence. Epilogue. This case remains one of the most haunting and unsettling experiences in my career. Although justice was ultimately served, the shadows of the past continue to linger. I hope that Rena's soul finds solace, knowing that her story was heard and that her memory was honored. The case serves as a grim reminder of the hidden horrors that can lie beneath the surface of everyday life. The room was engulfed in profound darkness, with only a slender beam of moonlight sneaking through the white lace curtains, its delicate dance accompanied by a whispering breeze. The atmosphere was eerily calm, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of the lace in sync with the cricket's serenade outside. On the surface, it seemed like an ideal setting for a restful sleep. Yet, JOSELYN was acutely aware of the truth. This silence was deceptive, a mere facade hiding the terror that lingered just beneath the veneer of tranquility. For weeks, JOSELYN had been trapped in a relentless state of dread. Her nights were plagued by an immobilizing fear that seemed to seep into her very core. This wasn't a fleeting nightmare or a trick of the imagination. It was something far more malevolent. To combat the encroaching darkness, she had grown accustomed to turning on a light before bed, a feeble attempt to dispel the shadows that haunted her. But tonight was different. As she settled into bed, the usual silence was abruptly shattered by a soft, slithering whisper that seemed to coil through the room. "We are coming for you," it hissed. The words echoed ominously, ricocheting off the walls and reverberating in her mind like a hollow drum. JOSELYN was caught in a fog of uncertainty, unable to discern if this was a cruel dream or a disturbing reality intruding upon her fragile sanity. The whispering intensified, becoming a cacophony of discordant sounds coming from all directions. It was as though the voices were right beside her, their volume almost deafening. JOSELYN's heartbeat quickened as the room's serene atmosphere transformed into one of oppressive dread. The once peaceful ambiance was now replaced by a suffocating, unsettling energy. The relentless ringing in her ears grew louder, a barrage of static reminiscent of multiple televisions blasting white noise. The sound ebbed and flowed, starting faint and distant before swelling into an overwhelming roar. In this twilight zone between sleep and wakefulness, JOSELYN's senses were acutely attuned. A cold sweat began to form on her back, and goosebumps spread across her skin, not from the chill, but from an innate sense of impending danger. It felt as though her body was screaming for her to flee, while her mind remained paralyzed in fear. Alongside the incessant ringing, there were other disturbing noises, voices drifting in and out of clarity, speaking in alien and unsettling tones. Occasionally, she recognized the distorted voices of her colleagues or family, but they were always off-kilter, distorted echoes of those she knew. These voices discussed trivial matters but were imbued with a mocking, taunting tone, cruelly reminding her of the darkness closing in on her life. Tonight, however, there were no voices. Instead, JOSELYN heard slow, deliberate footsteps dragging something heavy up the stairs. The sound halted right outside her door, sending a fresh wave of terror through her. Goosebumps crawled up her legs and spine, and she felt the familiar paralysis setting in. Her body was heavy and unresponsive, her attempts to scream mentally stifled by her own fear. The illusion of serenity in her room shattered, replaced by an oppressive darkness. Shadows twisted on the walls, their movements erratic and menacing. JOSELYN was immobilized, her muscles and vocal cords paralyzed, unable to make a sound or call for help. Her throat felt constricted, her breaths shallow and labored. Sweat trickled down her spine, each droplet a testament to her mounting terror. As the weight of dread settled heavily over her, JOSELYN braced herself for the inevitable confrontation. Her usual curiosity, which had once driven her to face her nightmares, now felt like a curse. She dreaded the moment she would have to open her eyes, but the suffocating pressure on her chest and the sensation of something pressing down on her were unbearable. With immense effort, she forced her eyes open, her heart pounding so violently it felt like it might burst. She saw it in the reflection of the window, the bedroom door slowly creaking open. A chilling draft swept into the room, carrying with it a nauseating stench of decay. The air grew dense and heavy, pressing down on her as a shadow began to stretch across the floor and creep up the walls. The shadow took the shape of a tall, menacing figure, its presence growing darker and more malevolent as it advanced. JOSELYN watched in terror as the creature's skeletal fingers emerged around the doorframe, its long, razor-sharp nails carving deep scratches into the wood. The creature's movements were jerky and unnatural, its limbs contorting grotesquely as it crawled towards her bed. JOSELYN recognized this entity. It was the leader of the shadows, the one that had orchestrated the terror. An ancient being of malevolence, existing between worlds and feeding on fear and despair. Its presence was palpable beneath her bed, its irregular breathing a chilling reminder of its hunger. It was a beast of nightmares, a soul collector with a growl deep and otherworldly. The creature's breath was hot and foul, and JOSELYN felt its cold, bony fingers brush against her cheek. The weight of the creature pressed down on the mattress, its presence growing nearer. JOSELYN wanted to scream, but no sound emerged. She was trapped, paralyzed by fear, her body betraying her. Desperate to reclaim control, JOSELYN squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to escape the nightmare. Yet, the creature's presence remained too real, too tangible. She felt the mattress shift as the creature drew closer, its breath cold and rank. Just when JOSELYN felt she could endure no more, the presence suddenly vanished. The weight lifted from the bed, the air grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling dissipated. JOSELYN lay there, trembling, her heart still racing. When she finally opened her eyes, the room seemed empty, bathed in a gentle, calming moonlight. Yet, the remnants of the night's terror lingered. Deep scratches marred the doorframe, and a pool of black, viscous liquid lay beside her bed. JOSELYN's mind raced, struggling to reconcile the nightmare with the tangible evidence before her. She knew she could no longer live in fear, haunted by shadows and creatures that tormented her nightly. Determined to find answers, JOSELYN spent the next day researching sleep paralysis, but none of the usual explanations matched her experiences. The shadows, the voices, and the creature defied conventional understanding. Desperate, she consulted a local psychic, seeking insight. The psychic's shop, filled with the scent of incense and the sound of wind chimes, offered a mystic ambiance. The psychic, a woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, listened intently as JOSELYN recounted her ordeal. After a moment's contemplation, the psychic revealed that JOSELYN was being targeted by an ancient, powerful entity existing between worlds, feeding on fear and despair. The psychic advised JOSELYN to confront the entity, to face her fear and banish it. Armed with protective charms and amulets provided by the psychic, JOSELYN prepared for the confrontation. As night fell, the familiar dread returned, the air growing colder and the shadows lengthening. The footsteps began again, dragging up the stairs and halting outside her door. The door creaked open, and the cold air and stench of decay filled the room. JOSELYN's heart raced, but she kept her eyes open, determined to confront the darkness. The shadow reappeared, stretching across the floor and walls, followed by the creature itself. JOSELYN watched as it crawled toward her bed, its eyes glowing with malevolence. Summoning all her courage, she recited the words the psychic had taught her, "I banish you from this place. You have no power over me. Leave now and never return." The creature snarled, its eyes blazing with fury. It lunged at JOSELYN, but she stood firm, repeating the words with increasing intensity. The creature let out a deafening roar, its form beginning to fade. The shadows receded, the air grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling lifted. With one final, enraged howl, the creature vanished completely. Exhausted but triumphant, JOSELYN collapsed onto her bed. She knew the darkness might return, lurking in the shadows, but she also knew she had the strength to confront it. In the weeks that followed, JOSELYN's life began to normalize. The shadows no longer haunted her, and the voices fell silent. She slept peacefully for the first time in months, freed from the fear that had once gripped her. As she lay in bed one night, gazing at the moonlit ceiling, JOSELYN felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The shadows might still lurk in the corners of her mind, but she was no longer afraid. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead.